Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice Podcast. The Heart of Hospice Podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice Podcast is being brought to you by GrandPad. This holiday season, give the gift of connection with GrandPad. GrandPad is the all-in-one tablet designed specifically for seniors. This Christmas, give the gift that keeps on giving, a world where no senior feels lonely or isolated. GrandPad is more than a gift, it's a gateway to cherished family memories. To learn more about GrandPad, visit grandpad.net/THOH. GrandPad, bringing families together.
Today's guest is funeral director Christa Ovenell, who's also known as Death's Apprentice. Christa Ovenell is a community-based death educator, a licensed funeral director and embalmer, and an end-of-life doula. She's the founder of Death's Apprentice Education and Planning, Inc., a company that specializes in holistic advanced care planning for individuals and forward-thinking companies. Christa takes a practical, empowering, and heart-centered approach to her end-of-life and death care practice. In our conversation today, Christa explains how she decided on the name of her company, Death's Apprentice, and you're going to hear about her unusual entrance into after-death care and her mother's response to her decision to change careers. When it comes to advanced care planning, Christa says, and this is amazing, it's better to get it written than to get it right. It's better to get it written than to get it right. Christa and I also discussed some of the myths about funeral and funeral planning that a lot of people think are true. You can find her website at deathsapprentice.ca, and the website for Death and Dying Network International is ddnint.com, and you'll find all those links in the show notes. So stay connected for my conversation with Death's Apprentice Christa Ovenell. There's a lot to learn. Christa, welcome to the Heart of Hospice Podcast. I'm so glad to have you with me.
Helen, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you.
It's great to talk with you. It's been quite a while since you and I first got acquainted and chatted. So today I'm going to start with a card and a question from the End of Life deck.
Beautiful.
Which I know you're familiar with. It's one of my favorite things to do. Okay, so here's your question for today. It's called Message from Beyond. If you could send one post-death message from beyond, what would you tell your family?
I'm okay.
Oh, I like that. You're much more of a straight shooter than I am, because when I think about this, I think about my daughters. I call them the jokers.
Right.
And I think, I want to tell them something that makes them feel a little creepy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, it's funny because it came out so fast. I didn't, I didn't know you were going to do that, and the answer was right there. But as soon as it came out, I thought that makes me sound a little selfish. Like they're going to be caring that I'm okay. I should maybe say something more motherly, like, "Oh, my darlings, I love you," or whatever. But you know what? I spent my life telling them that, and I actually do think that they might be, and we never know the circumstances of our death, and
Sure.
and maybe they are like, "Oh, is mom okay?" And I think I'm gonna be okay.
Well, I love it that was the first thing that came to you, but you also realize that you're saying those important things. I love you. I need you. You're saying those things now.
Every day.
That's a good way to do it. I like that.
Thank you.
We started off with a good question. I like that one. Okay.
Yeah.
We got to talk about your name.
Okay.
Death's Apprentice. Okay. I will tell you, it's a great name for maybe a hard rock band. Why did you choose this unusual name for yourself, and what exactly is your job description as Death's Apprentice?
Death's Apprentice. Well, it's funny because folks either love it or hate it, and there is definitely a certain demographic that typically closer to my mother's age in the sort of 70s, 80s, that's a little stressed by it, but everybody younger than that seems pretty happy with it. I chose the title Death's Apprentice for my company and frankly for myself, because I actually had to leave a high-paying, well-positioned corner office executive job to become a funeral director, and I had sort of I had this couple of years while I was an apprentice funeral director where I felt awkward, and I'm going to say even a little bit ashamed. In our society, we put so much emphasis on. Think of that question that we ask to strangers often at parties and things like that. What do you do? As if that somehow explains who you are,
Yes.
right? And we put so much emphasis on that. And I was always kind of like, geez, I'm nearly 50, and I left this, 6-figure corner office, highfalutin kind of situation to become an apprentice. And through my apprenticeship process, I actually really embraced the more metaphysical and even spiritual aspect of apprenticeship and of the apprentice mind and the beginner's mindset. And so when I decided to start my own company, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to double down on this. I am, in fact, apprenticing to life's greatest teacher. And death is, I think, life's greatest teacher. So that's the name part, but what I do as Death's Apprentice, really, I'm an educator. I'm a death educator. I'm someone who helps people and frankly companies, forward-thinking organizations. I help people get a little bit more comfortable thinking about, talking about, planning, and preparing for what we all know is life's only certainty. And I do that with sort of very carefully structured but very approachable curriculum that guides people through a topic that they really, sadly, don't know hardly anything about.
You took what a lot of people would consider a step back.
Oh, yeah.
Step down, however you want to think about it, to become a learner, right, as an apprentice. What drew you to create this career as a funeral director and of course, end-of-life doula work? But what really led you to become a funeral director?
Well, I was in my late 40s, and you're darn right, a step back, a step down, however you want to put that is, pardon the pun, dead true. I had been thinking about this change for honestly a couple of decades. I first probably came to the idea of funeral work in my 20s, And I had heard a story. My sister actually gets a special shout out here because she was and still is actually a corporate writer. She does a lot of work for corporations, helping them tell their stories. And she got hired by a big, rapidly growing funeral company down in the States to do some work to help them kind of craft their narrative. And she came home just so touched by the people that she had met and the stories that she had heard. And she shared a story with me about an embalmer of all things, something that we hardly ever hear about, who worked so hard to carefully reconstruct just a tiny portion of a man's child so that the man could sit with and be with and have some closure with his son, even though his son had died in that horrible Everglades accident. And there really only was a part of him to work with. So this story moved me and stayed with me. And I remember at that time, I remember thinking that is a helping profession. And I had always assumed that I would go into a helping profession. I really did. And I was in education for a long time before I moved into funeral work. And I kind of thought a nurse might be in my future, but I failed grade 8 science. And so that wasn't, palliative nursing was not going to be the route. And honestly, it just looked like, for me, I just thought, okay, funeral director, that's probably the way to go. You're walking with people during this incredibly difficult, incredibly intimate time, and usually for only a very short time. And it's a helping professional, right? So the problem was, Helen, that I kept looking for, in my 20s, then again in my 30s, a lot during my 40s, I kept looking, how do I become a funeral director? Probably the biggest search on my Google history ever, all the time, consistently, and sometimes while I was at work, was how do I become a funeral director? And unfortunately, I kept seeing that I had no choice but to give up my high-paying job and go back to school for not like a 6-week night school course, but a 2-year full-term, full-time program, while concurrently working full-time for a company as an apprentice funeral director. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it, Helen. And it eventually got to this point where I thought, well, could either be like everybody's favorite uncle who's like, I would have made a great quarterback, or I could just do it. I could just say, I'm going to do this. And I shocked the board of my my school when I stepped down, and I shocked pretty much everybody. And the last person I told was my 80-plus-year-old mother, who is still with us, a little tiny Ukrainian tank of a lady. And she had very strong opinions about sort of what her children did and how success is measured. And I have to tell you that I was kind of nervous, full-grown woman with full-grown children of my own, and I was nervous about telling her. And I finally went to her one day, and I sat beside her, and I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. And she was like, oh, okay, dear, what is it? And she patted the seat beside her, and I said, Mom, I'm going to leave my job. And that bit of intake of breath, and she said, what are you going to do? And I said, Mom, I've decided that I want to become a funeral director. And she looked at me, she cocked her head, and she looked at me, she took my hands, and she said, oh, my dear, I couldn't imagine anyone better.
Oh.
And right? And I thought right then, that actually kind of solidified, interestingly, back to the name question, the name, because I thought I knew how my mom was going to respond, and I didn't. I didn't take that beginner mindset into that conversation. I took all of my assumptions into that conversation, and she blew me out of the water with this acceptance, this radical acceptance, and this kindness, and this support. And I think sometimes women in their 40s and 50s, I think sometimes we need to hear, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Your mom's going to say it's okay.
Yeah, you sort of, I hate to say that it is, if as a grown woman, sometimes you sort of want the stamp of approval from your mom. And there's a lot of meaning in that, a lot of validation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's great that she endorsed that and supported you.
And I didn't tell her at the time that, hey, Mom, my actual intention is to become a funeral director and embalmer, then become an end-of-life doula, strictly so that I can mess with the death systems in North America. I didn't tell her that little extra
That's
bit,
probably
but
a bit much for that
it might have been a
original,
bit much for her,
yeah, that
at the
original conversation. So let's dive into some of this stuff, because as a funeral director, you know the insides, right? The inside workings of things. And we know that the death industry, the funeral industry, is a lot like the healthcare industry in Canada and the US. It needs reform. Everybody knows it. But the fact of the matter is, people still die every single day. And this is the system in which we work and live and die.
And live and die.
Right. So one of my goals on the podcast is always to equip people with information that helps them make better choices, have the best experience they can, whether it's funeral planning or hospice care, end of life care. I think it's really important for people to be informed about what's out there, because we know it's a crappy system, right?
Yep.
We know it's not great. It's a for-profit system in a lot of different places, but this is what we've got to work with. So we're going to take a deep dive today into funeral planning and funeral directing, and we're going to talk about some of the myths, because I know you love dispelling myth busting, right? So we're going to do that. Okay, so let's start with some of the bigger things. What are the biggest things you recommend that people include in their funeral planning?
The very biggest thing is to do some. And it really blows my mind, actually, that we are starting to get better at talking about dying, but we're not really very good at talking about what happens after you're dead. And I don't mean metaphysically at all.
Right.
I mean just the practicalities. So finding ways, using that death deck, for example, to maybe just start sprinkling in questions and conversation is a great thing to do. But from a purely practical perspective, I don't ever want you meeting a funeral director on the day that you need to meet a funeral director. So one of the first things that you could do is you could drive around your town or hop on Google or what have you, and just like, who are the funeral providers in my town? And then dive a little deeper. Are these corporately owned? Does that align with my values? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, are there any independent funeral providers in my town? Oh, okay, look, I've found these ones. And then just the way you would go to research about the new car that you want to buy, or for the love of God, which new model of phone that you might decide upon, you put a little bit of research into your own after death care. Maybe go and meet some folks, all right? And walk in and see how the place feels for you. See how you're treated. Ask questions that are a little different, a little outside the box. Ask how things work. Maybe find out where bodies are stored, that kind of stuff. At the very, very start, though, I think one of the best things you can do, and this sounds so ridiculously straightforward, but so many of us forget to do it, a simple sheet of paper that has information on it, or it could be electronically stored and sent via email, for example, or even a text message to the person that is going to have to be dealing with this after you're dead, but with simple basic information, including how to get into your phone and how to get into your computer. The number of things that have to happen after a death occurs, I think we've rounded up a little bit, but it's something like 87,322
What?
things. It's really just so much work after someone dies.
So is that an exaggeration, or is that a legitimate number?
It honestly is far more than you think. Yes, it's a small exaggeration. But something that I like to help people visualize this is, if you think of all of the decisions that you make over the course of a day and a week and a month, right? And maybe even a year. Think of all of those decisions that you make as a living person in good health with a sound mind. You think of all of those decisions over the course of a day, a week, a month, and maybe even a year. And then you realize that it could take upwards of a year, sometimes even longer, to close an estate, right? Well, guess what? Those decisions that you used to make as a live person, somebody is going to have to be making them on your behalf. So it might not be 87,000 decisions that you have to make all at once, but it's going to feel like that by the time that estate is finally closed and settled.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I don't want people doing is at the very beginning of this process being in a bit of a state of panic because they can't get into somebody's phone, computer, or don't have information, basic information about things like social, I think, security numbers down where you are, or social insurance numbers up where I am, or where someone used to bank or whatnot. So very high level. This, if you go into Amazon, or if you walk into your local bookstore and you wander over to a planning section, you're going to see books with all sorts of fun titles, and I'm dead now, I'm dead now, who cares, or whatever. You're going to find, and they're often big fat spiral bound books, and people buy them with the best of intentions, and they sit empty on people's bookshelves or on their sideboards. And so just make it simpler, right? Make sure that people have the very basics about who you are, where you bank, where you work. And I'm going to give you one free tip that nobody ever expects. Did you know that, depending on where you live, but in most parts of North America, part of the death registration process will be asking a question that surprises tons of people. And the question is, can you tell me where the deceased's mother was born? Can you tell me where this dead person's mother was born? And by the way, what was her maiden name?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And this is just plain old vital statistics. This is just plain old death registration stuff. You can actually proceed if you don't have that information. You can, absolutely. You will be able to continue to burial or cremation, but often hearing that question right out of the gate, maybe sometimes hours after somebody has died, boom, you get kicked into this like, oh my God, I need to focus on this other thing, instead of just focusing on what you need to focus on, which is the fact that you've just endured a life-changing loss, and you need to gather your people and your loved ones around you. So all the basics, just the basics. Make sure people can get into your phone, can get into your computer, have a sense of who your HR person is at work, know where you bank. If you're not going to do the really granular stuff, just take a big picture kind of approach to it, because something I always say is that something is better than nothing. And if you wait for perfection and you try and get this all signed and sealed perfectly and wrapped up, you're probably not going to do it.
That's when the book sits empty on the shelf.
Yep.
Right? The workbook, the legacy binder, any of those things that you've bought.
They're empty, and you're not going to get it done. And almost everybody that I work with has some book that they're like, oh, should I bring it? And I'm like, well, you can, but
listen, I probably have 4 of them on my shelf, things that people have sent me, stuff that I've purchased when I'm doing the podcast. And I have to admit that I haven't really filled out any of them completely.
No, getting it done, getting it written rather than getting it right. That is also part of the beginner's mindset too. That is like, I am just...
Say that again for the people.
Oh my God, that's how I got through my master's degree. Get it written, don't get it right.
I like that.
I mean, it's a bonus if you also get it right, but but don't let getting it right stop you from getting it written.
But if you never get anything written, 100% in your head is 0 in reality, and it doesn't help anybody who's having to take care of you after you've died.
That's right.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. We're going to pause for just a minute. My guest has more to share.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice Podcast is being brought to you by GrandPad. This holiday season, give the gift of connection with GrandPad, the perfect way to keep your older loved ones close, even when you're far apart. GrandPad is the all-in-one tablet designed specifically for seniors, making it easier than ever to share holiday cheer across generations. With secure, simple video calling and photo sharing, you can virtually join in on decorating the tree or watch as your little ones open their presents, no matter the distance. Spread joy throughout the year with GrandPad's user-friendly interface, allowing seniors to enjoy music, games, photos, as well as emails from family. No need to worry about Wi-Fi setup. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service included. This Christmas, give the gift that keeps on giving, a world where no senior feels lonely or isolated. With GrandPad, you're not just giving a device, you're giving the warmth of family connection. Make this holiday season unforgettable. To learn more about GrandPad, visit grandpad.net/THOH or call 1-888-904-4723 today to order your GrandPad. It's more than a gift, it's a gateway to cherished family moments. GrandPad, bringing families together.
I want to talk about myths and misconceptions and misinformation because there's a lot of it floating out around there. We don't like talking about death, right? And so we perpetuate, and sometimes I think the industry perpetuates, because I know hospice is that way, some of the myths and misinformation about who we are and what we do. So what are some of the biggest myths that you have seen about options for disposition of a body?
Sure. All right. So a couple of the really biggest ones. Disposition of a body, depending on where you live, in all parts of North America, that will be either burying someone in the ground, or flame-based cremation. That's available to everyone in all of North America.
Right.
Now, there are, in some parts of North America, a couple of other types of disposition that may be available. One of them that you might have heard of is alkaline hydrolysis. That's also known commonly as water-based cremation or aquamation. All right.
Yes.
Another one that's available in many states, but 0 provinces up here yet, is called natural organic reduction. The common name for that is human composting.
So that's not legal in Canada in any...
Nowhere in Canada at the moment. Yeah, many places in the States, but nowhere in Canada yet. And we do have alkaline hydrolysis available in a few provinces and 1 territory. But gosh, it was with me at the helm and a couple of other folks were working hard to make that available. But so those are the things that are not myths. Those are the things that are wonderful and true and available. Here's a couple of really big myths. One of them, your Aunt Linda has probably sent you this on Facebook. The tree pod. Okay.
The tree pod.
The tree pod. So this came out of this sort of speaks to the "I want to be a tree" narrative that you hear from people sometimes. And this beautiful artistic rendering was made, I think out of a company in Italy. And what it looks like is an egg, kind of a large human-sized egg that is that the human body is folded up in kind of a fetal shape, and somehow, imagine how, I cannot quite figure it out, stuffed into, and then this is purportedly planted in the earth and a tree grows out of it. Like, your listeners today are going to be like Googling tree burial pod, and they'll see it and they'll be like, yes, Aunt Linda did send that to me. So the thing is that this is out of a company out of Europe. I believe it was Italy. And they went on a mad funding round with this idea. It's literally just an idea. And the one positive thing that I can say about it is that it got people thinking and talking about green burial methods. All right. So that's a positive. But let's just for a second think about that ridiculous egg-shaped coffin, right? Where are you going to store
because that's
these?
really what it is.
Like, that's what it is. It's an egg-shaped coffin. Where are you going to store these? How are you, and how much space are you going to need in a vehicle to move them from one place to another? Importantly, how are you going to fold grandma up into that fetal shape and then what, I don't know, grease her into it? Like what are you speaking of dignified disposition, right, Helen? So this one drives me crazy. And then let's just for a second remember that trees have roots. And if you plant a tree, like part of the reason that you don't see trees in most conventional graveyards and cemeteries is that, and you may see them on the edges, but you will not see them right in the middle, right? Because they have roots that go down at least as deep as the height of the tree and often as wide as the width of the tree. And so if you have this root system, then how are you going to plant anything beside it or next to it, right? How are you going to do that? You're not, because you would be damaging those tree roots. So, and then the tree would die. None of it is possible. It's a pretty idea. It drives me insane though. And it keeps circulating, these ridiculous trees.
So no one's actually doing that here in the United States or in Canada.
No one is doing it in Europe either. No one's doing it in Europe either. It was like, it was sort of a, wouldn't this be nice? And frankly, I mean, not to put too harsh a word on it, but it's a bit fraudulent, really, because you're sort of selling an idea a conception that cannot become materialized.
Yeah, there's some practicalities that really keep that from working.
Ever. How would you even then transport that egg, that orb? It's not going to fit in a standard hearse.
Oh, no. I mean, I have some ideas, but it's all very comical and disrespectful.
Exactly. None of them would be to the dignified disposition of a human body, which is an enshrined and protected right in in both of our countries, right? So that's a big one, the tree pod. The other one, maybe you've heard of the mushroom suit. You've heard of the mushroom? Yes. Okay. So this one, the idea was, and there was even a woman who went on a TED Talk, and she's had millions of views and whatnot. The idea was that you would buy this, I think, $10,000 suit, right, and be essentially zipped into. It's a suit, two-piece kind of suit that you get zipped into, and then buried. And the idea somehow is that the mushrooms that are embedded in the lining of this suit would help your body decompose more quickly. Newsflash, friends, newsflash. Your body knows exactly how to decompose, and it does not need anything extra at all, right? At all. And all you need is about 3 feet of depth. 3 feet, or maybe you can go deeper if you need to, but with a natural burial, you absolutely do not have to. And then you put that dirt back on top, and you do not introduce mycelium that could be completely invasive or from some absolutely other part of the world that isn't going to thrive in your soil because it comes from a different part of the world. The core here is that, again, the good thing I can say when I'm feeling charitable, what I will say is this is a conversation starter. This allowed people to kind of have some fun and imagination about disposition, which is not something that we ever talk about at polite dinner time conversations, right? Or we rarely talk about. So that's the positive side. The negative side is it's been completely debunked, and people were essentially bilked. People who bought these suits thinking that they somehow needed them were bilked. It's not sound. It's not compassionate, and it just further contributes, I think, to the way that funeral directors, we kind of have a bad rep anyway. And there's modern funeral directors and people like me who are trying really hard to regain trust. And how we're doing that is by sharing real information about how you can become involved in the after-death care and the memorialization of your people, how you could use our expertise if you need to and want to. And trust me, there's a bunch of reasons you might want to, because some of this work isn't very pretty. But we're doing this by education and by like in-depth and real work that has to do with empowering consumers rather than kind of tricking consumers into buying something that they don't need.
Right. More family-led, family-guided.
Yeah. Family-led, family-guided, modern funeral directors and doulas, and I'm both. I'm one of, like, honestly, there's only probably couple dozen of us in the entire continent who are both licensed funeral director embalmers and end-of-life doulas. And the goal here is to sort of ensure that sort of before, during, and after, people have the highest possible level of care and understanding. And family can be involved in any way they want, but they've often been led to believe over the last 150 years that this is stuff that we have to leave to the professionals. You don't. Now, again, as I said, it's heavy and hard work, and sometimes it's very, very ugly work. So and sometimes it's boring. Remember what I said about the needing to know the name and where the person was born, the dead person's mother, and their maiden name. Well, that's kind of boring, right? Just entering all that in. So there might be things you want a professional to help with for all sorts of reasons, but you can also be engaged and involved, and a good modern funeral director won't be threatened by that idea. They will be there to help you and to help guide you with those ideas.
This is so interesting. I think it's a lot like end-of-life care, that people don't know what they don't know until they're thrust into the situation.
Yes.
We don't like to have those conversations about end-of-life, funerals, disposition, etc. And tell me what you think about this. I think that people our generation are beginning an unlearning.
Yes.
Where we have created distance and sterile procedures and processes and medicalization of death. We're unlearning those things and moving back to family-led death care and green burials, natural burials. What do you think about that?
I think that you've really hit the nail on the head. It's unlearning or it's relearning, reconnecting to stuff that we knew innately. Our bodies know how to decompose. They don't need a mushroom suit. So we're unlearning that kind of this capitalist idea that we've got to have some fancy thing to wrap around us. And we're reconnecting to the idea that our bodies, just as they know how to die, our bodies also know how to do what happens next. And, gosh, you're running the risk of getting me on a rant here, my friend, but you have
Rant
seen
away.
You have seen the way that dying is portrayed in movies, right? And
gosh.
shows and whatnot, and how wrong it is. And it probably makes you crazy. And when you're trying to help people unlearn, you're having to disassemble all of that and give them this other thing that sometimes isn't as pretty. And that often can be a little scary if you've never experienced it before. And if you're basing your experiences on what you've seen on TV. Same for after death care. The number of times that I'll be watching something and I see a scene where the knock comes at the door, the police says, "Oh, your brother's dead. Will you come down to the morgue and identify him?" That doesn't happen, And this idea that you would just slide out a body from this cold shelf, and that they would actually be viewable in that state and even identifiable in that state is crazy to me. But that's what people think happens, and it doesn't. And where you die and how you die and the circumstances under which you have died, all of these will contribute to whether and how involved you can be as a family. But no matter what, you always can be. Do you know, I recently, actually, no, it's a few years ago now. I was part of serving a family who had a death completely unexpected. It was a youth death, which is always reportable to the coroner, and then just the circumstances also made it reportable to the coroner. So this young girl had been dead, and in the coroner's care for, I think, more than 10 days when she was then released to the funeral home. And thank God the people where she lived, and they had support, and they had a modern funeral director, and they were able to bring her home, because that's what they wanted to do, but they didn't think that they could because of these steps and these circumstances. Now, in that case, you know what? Embalming was a really good idea. And in fact, the only way that you could have made that circumstance happen. And this is why, even though I'm a very green girl and a green funeral director, I am not knee-jerk anti-embalming, because embalming is something that can actually open up all sorts of wonderful opportunities for viewings and whatnot that may not be available to you otherwise. So anyway, this little girl, this young woman, was embalmed, and then she was brought home, and they ended up having like a lying in for two days, I think, and then she was sent to burial. Couldn't be a green burial because of the fact that she was embalmed, but there were other green principles that they were able to have, and just like in life, in death, sometimes you have to weigh and balance things. What is the most important outcome? What do we need to do to get there? And what was really important for that family was being part of that experience, and they wanted to do it. And thankfully, they had a modern funeral director who was able to help guide them through all of those steps and prepare them for what the realities were, and this, frankly, I don't think we're going to talk about cost, but this is why when people say things like to me, like, how much does a funeral cost? I'm like, well, I don't know. How much does a car cost? Right? Like,
Depends on what you get in it.
It just absolutely depends on what you're getting. And that family, you know what, there were some extra costs with embalming, and then transportation back and forth. And then, there were a few other things that ended up, that was far more than what it might be if you just took somebody from hospital to morgue to crematorium. Boom, that's it, nothing else.
Right.
Well, those are two completely, it's not even apples and apples, that's apples and orangutans, so yeah, boy, I hope that was not too wide ranging, but there you have it.
No, that's exactly what we were going to talk about. That's perfect. So
Okay.
Would you say that it's important for people to understand when they communicate with a funeral home that it doesn't have to be 100% this or 100% that, strictly this, strictly that, nothing but traditional embalming and burial, that there are pieces that can be implemented or included to blend and meld some of those things?
I do. And I think this is why it's so important that as consumers of funeral care and death caring practices, that we are empowered and educated consumers. Because you know what? Let's just be honest. At any of the funeral homes that have a corporate head office and shareholders, well, they have a fiduciary duty to grow every single year, and that is something that sort of has to occur, right? And so part of the reason that you get these cookie cutter approaches to funeral service and just doing it one way is because that is a profitable model.
Right. It's the way to scale.
The way to scale. And I think that when you have, and I am not against making money, my friend, but when you have an empowered and educated group of people that you're serving, when mortals are empowered and can ask the right questions, then what's going to happen is they're going to feel more and better served, and they are going to be able to be more personal, and they are going to reconnect. And as you said earlier, they're going to kind of unlearn these funereal traditions that maybe weren't our traditions anyway, that we never felt all that connected to. And we are going to reconnect to new ways to ceremonialize people and some of them may involve some really traditional elements, like a lying in, or like a viewing the night before a service, or maybe maybe somebody even had, deep Catholic views, and her service is going to be bang, 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 just one check mark after the other in a perfect Catholic mass. There is nothing wrong with that if that is what reflects the person's beliefs and values. But if that doesn't reflect their beliefs and values, and that's the only thing that you know, then what happens is you become really disconnected from it, and you're like, I just don't want anything. And the simple fact is that we are ceremonial beings, and we are people who, for since the beginning of time, have been ceremonializing our dead. And it's only been in the last like 150 years or so in North America that we've come away from doing that ourselves. So it's no big surprise that we've forgotten, because frankly, 10 years is long enough to forget how to do something.
Sure.
And several generations, you're going to need someone how to help teach you how to can your peaches again, right? But
Right.
thankfully, we still have elders who can do that. Thankfully, we still have written records. Thankfully, we are innately ceremonial beings, and we can we can newly invent our own ceremonies and whatnot. And I think that something just like in planning, I think that when you're actually doing a service, something is better than nothing. And having an opportunity for people to gather, to come together, and to give love, care, and support to those left behind, to the people who are not dead, to the living, to those who must live with the new reality of life without their beloved person in it, or maybe their slightly irritating person in it. Who knows? They are going to gain and gather support from such a gathering, and they will be able to begin to make sense of what life looks like beyond this step. And that's why it's so important, and that's why I'm so passionate about it.
I love it. Okay. We're getting close to the end of our time together, Christa, but I want to ask you, so let's get a little personal. If you were going to consider the end of your life and what that would look like, and you were going to have hospice care, what would you want the hospice team to know about you? Tell me 3 things that you would want them to know about you.
This is a secret. This is the number one question that I ask people in my program called Prep School. And so I'm well versed for this one. I would want people to know that I would want the team caring for me to know that I love smalls. I love children. I love babies. I love the noise and chaos and clutter and silliness of the littles. And I would like to hear the crying, the laughing, and the Lego being tipped over and things like that. I love littles and babies. So I would like people to know that, because then maybe they'll talk to me about their littles, or they'll show me pictures or that kind of thing. It would also mean that people would know that they'd be welcome to bring their smalls to my bedside, and that I would really, really welcome that. I think I would want people to know that like food is hugely important to me. And it's kind of a disappointment to me that that's one of the earlier things that goes when you're in the active state of dying, right? That you're your appetite is gonna go. So I know that I'm not gonna want to eat much, but I would love to know that there's like great food for the people who are coming to visit me, and that they have like some butter tarts, and they have some fresh fruit, and maybe they've got some cake, or they've just got like some really good food, not hospital food, right?
No.
So that would be no. So that would be important to me. And I think the third thing that I would want people to know is that I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of the unknown, and I have been unafraid. And I keep doing stupid things like quitting my high-paying job to become a death educator, because frankly, I'm not afraid it's gonna work out. And so when I am in hospice, let's start from a place in all of our conversations of me not being afraid. And it's okay if you're afraid, but maybe my lack of fear might just like make a little bit of space for you to kind of come in my tent and just feel what that feels like, to just not be afraid of the inevitable.
Nice. So this actually makes me want to ask you, so we know that nobody ever said at the end of their lives, what would you like to eat? What would comfort food? Nobody ever says that, well, I'd like to have hospital blue Jell-O. Nobody says that.
Nobody says that.
So what would comfort food be for you at end of life?
Oh my gosh. I wonder if it might be a warm like a warm picked strawberry from Richmond, where I grew up, that was like warmed on the vine. And there's this type of strawberries that are only available for 3 weeks of the year. I know you can get strawberries from California or wherever, like all through the year, but there's this one type that's only available for 3 weeks. And I normally have some strawberry jam made from them in my freezer. So if I'm not dying in that particular set of 3 weeks, though, wouldn't that be nice? Then maybe a nice freshly toasted piece of homemade sourdough bread with that strawberry jam on top of it.
Yum. Oof, I like that. Okay, you've also taken on a new role. You have recently started working with DD&I, formerly known as Death Doula Network International, and it is now known as Death and Dying Network International. Tell me about the work that you're doing there and how my listeners can connect in with that.
Absolutely. So Death and Dying Network used to be known as the Death Doula Network International. You're going to find it on the web at ddnint.com, Death and Dying Network International.com. The work that it's a member-based organization. And so we have expanded that membership. Doulas, of course, are still welcome and probably currently make up the majority of our members. But what I know is that there are a lot of people who will never identify as, quote, being a doula, and they might not ever want to be a doula, but they are going to, at some point, they are going to doula someone through an end-of-life experience. And my thought with the name change was essentially that if you are mortal, you are welcome here. And my goal is to make the DD&INT the wonderful resource that it already is, to take those resources and make them deeper and richer and make them available to literally anyone who is in or connected to or adjacent to the death caring space. So doctors, obviously, and nurses and registered massage therapists and clinical counselors and therapists and folks who host podcasts and people who might need to care for someone that they love, for people who might be caring for someone that they don't care all that much for, but are finding themselves in a situation that they need to. I want this to be a real go-to resource. It's already an incredible community full of really wonderful people, but I hope that it just keeps growing and gets more great.
Absolutely. So can people still find you working as Death's Apprentice as well?
Absolutely. So that's deathsapprentice.ca. I have a pretty healthy following on Instagram, and that's where I do my daily dose of death education. And that's free death education in small, simple daily doses, usually thematically organized. Deathsapprentice.ca is the Instagram handle, and conveniently, that's also my website.
Well, I will have links to all your websites and your Instagram account in the show notes so people can go in and find you very easily. Thank you so much, Christa. You're awesome, a breath of fresh air, and thank you for all the myth busting today. We did some heavy lifting, didn't we? Good stuff.
We did. Helen, it was such a joy. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.